Imagine a scene where the characters are walking into a tavern and the DM turns to one of the players and says, "Hey, what does the tavern keep look like?" Is that a cool moment for the player or is that jarring? It can differ. So we're going to talk about giving players greater narrative control and how to make that work for different types of players. Finding out how to give greater narrative control to players is really worth doing, but it's a trip that you have to take as a DM, both with what your style will be and the style of your players, the comfort that they have with whether they feel they're still in immersion or whether they are in a jarring moment. Recently, I was playing this game of Fiasco, and this is the second edition of the game. It's a lot of fun because it gives you cards that allow you to play this free-form game that is DM-less, okay? So we have things like a relationship card that says Bounty Hunter and Hunter, or in Bounty. So one of you will be the bounty hunter, and one of you is the other person's trying to hunt down. And you might have a relationship like we had, War, you killed my father. And then a location like the dungeon lower level, trapped corridor. Out of these cards, you start creating relationships, and you do this all without a DM, right? You just immerse yourselves in the story, in the fiasco that will play out where things are going to go wrong, spin out of control, and you have fun. This particular game was using the Dragon Slayers playset by Logan Bonner. And one of the things I found myself thinking as we all created this story together is how easy it was for all of us to create this immersion. Like, we were not worried about, oh, I'm breaking the wall or I'm making this up, because that's the point. Each of us, 3 players, were making up the story as we went, and we had full narrative control of all the pieces. So when we had this card that gave us, trapped corridor, I decided, well, my character who's being sought by a bounty hunter, that's where I'm going to go hide to try to escape the 2 of you. And the other 2 were saying, well, we're in this relationship, and so we're doing this thing. We just all started creating it. And what played out, we were 100% happy making it up, right? And because that was like the contract of the game, the rules, the situation, we all expected this to happen. Contrast that with that moment I started with. You walk into a tavern and your DM says to you, hey, make up this thing. Some players will love that. They'll say, oh yeah, that tavern keep, they have a scar across their eye. They're bald. They always have a scowl on their face. And only if you are have known them forever can you get a smile from them. Some players, that's just totally fun, no problem. I've seen other players who, when they're asked a question like that, will freeze up and go, I don't know, you tell me, you're the DM. That's kind of why you're in the role behind the DM screen. You're supposed to do this for me and make it all up. I'm going to have fun when you deploy a story. And where you are along that axis can really vary, right? So I recall one time that I was doing an idea that you can find in one of my products, the rules for collaborative campaign creation. And I was going to run Tomb of Annihilation, and I was working with the players to ask some questions like, how interested are you in the idea of a campaign that has pirates or being under the water? And they were really happy to give me that kind of feedback and think about it and even give me some ideas like, yeah, the pirates are really major in this area, right? And then we got to a point where I said, who are the villains? And very quickly, a couple of them said, hey, that's for you. I want this campaign to have surprises. I don't want to help create that. And that was great. And so if we go back and think, why can narrative control work and why can it not? One of the ways that it doesn't work is when it gets out of the role that we feel comfortable with, right? We have an impression of what we want out of a role-playing game experience. And if it takes us out of our role, then we feel like the fourth wall has been broken in a not fun way, and we're stepping out and seeing it as a game. Fiasco manages to do that by saying, yes, the game is this, and so just have fun with it, and everybody's on the same page. It's when you try to blend those together that you can have some sticking points. So let's talk about some ways that we can make this more fun. One of the ways that we can make it easier for narrative play coming from the players to get them to contribute is to do it before the campaign has started. I talk about this a lot in my rules for collaborative campaign creation. And all of that is based on my experiences playing games like Dresden Files. In the Dresden Files RPG, you, and in Fate as a general concept, you often are working together to build the elements of the campaign. And I remember how it blew my mind the first time I played Dresden Files, and we worked on the setting premise. And by the end of that session, I knew more about this world that I was going to play in than players in my Dark Sun campaign knew after months of play. Because we had come up with very clear ideas, right? We had said, hey, the dock workers are all werewolves in this city. And in the forest, there is a huge treant that controls everything. And City Hall is run by the wizards, right? We'd come up with these big parts of the campaign setting, and I can still tell them to you today, right? That set these very clear expectations for play, and that was really cool. There are ways to do this. Like if I'm going to run an Icewind Dale campaign, I could say to the players, hey, here's a quick description of each of the 10 towns. You all take a look at this. Which of these sound like the coolest towns? Which one do you want to start in, right? And that's a very legitimate thing that because it's before the campaign start, the players can say to themselves, yeah, it does make sense for me to contribute in this way and say that this town looks really cool to me. This one's cool, and I'd love to live here. I'd love to start here. Like, I'm very curious to learn about this aspect and be a part of this thing that's described for this town. It doesn't break immersion because we haven't started yet. Another way we can do things is to tap into backstories. So imagine that we're starting in a big major city. There are a lot of areas that we're going to detail throughout the campaign of these different areas of the city. Well, we can turn someone like the player of the bard and say, hey, you're bard. How do they earn coin before our adventure begins? Oh, I sing in a bunch of taverns. Cool. Would you be willing to write up your favorite tavern? Like just some interesting things about it, what you like about it, why you spend time there, and maybe like the names of a couple of people you hang out with. Now that can go into my folder of cool stuff about the campaign. But what also happened is that player now knows these elements of not just their backstory, but of the campaign setting, and can pull from those. Like, hey, can I go talk to to Jonas, the barkeep, and get some clues, since they know me? And that's a really cool thing to have happen, right? That your players are now going in there and drawing off and feeding off of that energy. That's super, super fun. Similarly, you can have elements of the backstory that can come in during play, but when they have to do solely with that backstory, it makes more sense that the player can tell you about them and contribute to the scene, right? Like if you're, let's say there's a character that grew up in a circus, and it's a traveling circus and so on. Well, if that traveling circus comes to town, it makes a lot of sense that the player could say to you, yeah, let me tell you a little bit about the kinds of things that the circus provides, because they know it's part of their backstory and they own it just as much as you do, maybe even more in some ways. So getting a narrative contribution from your player like that is a lot easier to say, right? You see the flag unfurl of the pirates. Your father was a pirate. This ship might be one that you know. You tell me, is this one that you recognize? And if so, give me a few details. And then the player gets to decide, no, it's one I don't know anything about. Surprise me. Or, yeah, let me tell you a bit. I want to lean into this. In fact, it's my dad's pirate ship. He's come for me, right? You can do that more easily when you know these kinds of things. You can do that during play if people are comfortable. And if not, you could set up beforehand. You could say, hey, in the next scene, there may be something that has to do with your backstory. Do you want to give me some details on the pirate ships that are part of your dad's fleet? And would that be cool if something showed up about this? And that's kind of cool, right? And you could have a little bit of a conversation, even like, what would you like to see come back from your backstory and kind of deal with, right? You can have that off scene. So then when you drop it in scene, the player can jump into it more because the player will be prepped, right? They can say, yeah, in fact, I see that, the captain at the top is wearing this very distinctive hat, and I know that's my father. Something like that, right? They can feel free to add to it because they prepared for it, they understand it, they've got something to contribute, and they're going to feel good doing that, which is really important. Another thing we can do is specific scene elements where if we do this kind of programmatically, if it's a known approach, players can be ready for it. The tavern can be great when it's a campaign where everybody loves contributing and telling you what the tavern keeps look like, or tell me about 3 interesting people in the tavern, right? If you like that kind of play and your group is used to it, you'll totally just do that as it happens. And I've been at tables of great DMs who use that technique and everybody kind of expects it. And so it just works. I don't actually super love that, but I can roll with it when I see it. And so when I know everybody else likes it, I'm good. But a neat technique that Keith Baker did in his game, Phoenix Dawn Command, is a card called the Torch. And this is used for initiative, but on the back, it's got a sort of a set of lines and little circles to check off that you've used them. And what you do with this is you create it for a particular room. And on it, you write elements that are in the room. Like there could be a rack of weapons. That's something very obvious. But there could be things like the oven, the drapes. There could be a chandelier, right? Things like that. You can add these elements on there. And part of the game is that you can use an element for a benefit in a scene. So you get a mechanical benefit by interacting with the element. By putting these on a card and then having them be part of this initiative that goes around, players are encouraged to do something with those elements and riff off of them. So they are contributing narratively to what happens in this room, right? The room's not static. You can swing from the chandelier, you can throw something in the oven, you can pull down the drapes onto a foe. You are more encouraged to do this kind of piece because those elements are there. And players get used to it because there will almost always be one of these cards. In Phoenix Dawn Command, there always is. So if you find something that you can do that's reproducible and dependable, players will be a lot better off with their ability to interact with it, right? It's not going to break their immersion because they know, oh yeah, this is the scene elements. These are the scene elements that are on the torch. I'm used to this. You know what? I'm going to interact with this thing, or I'm going to not. It's my choice. It's very fun. And that's a nice aspect. If you look at these different ideas for narrative contributions, a lot of these are really about the fact that you have that choice. I'm not just putting a force on you, like a requirement that you give me this right now and be super creative about it. It's up to you, and you're a little more prepared for it. A way to give your characters narrative control that tends to work pretty well is with resting or with travel. There are a number of games that try to do this in some way, including for D&D, but also for other role-playing games. So for example, Savage Worlds, they have a rule for something called an interlude. And the idea is that in some situations when you're resting, you have a moment that's just kind of downtime around the campfire or wherever you are. If you're playing Deadlands, it would be probably the campfire or gathered in a common room, something like that. And you can decide that as DM, that you're having an interlude moment. And what you do is you pull a playing card, so it's going to be spades, hearts, diamonds, or clubs, and then you're going to have one of 3 things, either a downtime moment, backstory, or trek. And downtime, depending on the card that's established, downtime will sort of say, here's what you did when you were alone. And that could be that you were all just walking through somewhere, but you had a moment, maybe in the forest or on the plains, that you had this kind of moment of thought or dealt with something. And there's a prompt question. So for example, for hearts, the hero practices a skill. What is it? Backstory is the tale of the character's past told through your voice and narration. So again, we get examples by suit. So if clubs can be a tale of misfortune from your hero's past, perhaps revealing something of their hindrances or a dark secret, and so on. The third one is trek, and it's about sort of things that you discovered as you were traveling, which mimics the One Ring rules a bit, or not mimics, but similar to what One Ring travel rules sometimes have. So this system is interesting of an interlude. I have not 100% used it because I find that it's a bit jarring in that way. Similar to how we might say, tell me about the bartender, we're now saying something like, what was one misfortune you dealt with when you were traveling? And I know other folks like Keith Baker who I mentioned with Phoenix Dawn Command, Keith Baker talks about how he likes to do a travel montage where he says, hey, let's go around the table. When we were going through the forest, tell me one thing that you overcame and how you did it. And a lot of DMs use this kind of a technique, and it can be a lot of fun, but it also is, again, sort of putting that spotlight on there. The interlude system can do that, but it also can be, we can dial it back from there, and I think find a really nice system, which is what I've been using in my game, and I've found it's really good. So we have a pause, right? We have a reason why we have, during our travels, in between adventures, we have this pause. Now I can have an interlude scene. And for this interlude scene, what I can say to the players is, hey, we're having an interlude. And what I often do is I'll just say, who would like to bring up a topic? Either share something that your character has dealt with recently, something you overcame, something you're pondering, or you can interact with other people who are here at this campfire or in this tavern or whatever, to other characters to talk about something. And it's been really neat. Sometimes what the characters do is they'll talk about kind of the plot of the story and the mystery and sort of say like, hey, who do you think's behind that thing? What do you think happened to that person that's missing? Things like that, right? They'll just use the time to think about what's going on. And at the end of it, I give them a reward. And that's something that's in the Savage World system. You give them what's called a Benny. So you give them some sort of thing, inspiration, some kind of benefit towards the future, right? An extra die to roll, whatever it might be based on the system you're running. But that's a cool way to say, awesome, you led that discussion, you get that benefit. And if someone else amuses you greatly, well, you can give them a benefit as well, right? Like, oh, the way you reacted to those plans and came up with really cool ideas, great. It can also be a moment when the characters decide to reach out to each other through their players to handle something. So we had a situation where one of the characters had a sort of mysterious backstory, and another character drew them out and said, hey, I got to ask, these rumors about you being a killer, and people seeing you in town, what's with that? Are you doing these things, right? And that was a fun way to have like a really neat conversation, player led, player responding, right? It's like just a role-playing moment. No one's really like in the hot seat. It felt very chill and really kind of neat explanation, right? And I think what's fun is this group of characters that I'm running, they all kind of have some little mysterious angles where this is a nice moment for them to sort of reach out and talk about that in a way that you might not when you're in the middle of fighting in a dungeon or, other things like that are like the adventure, right? So this gives you that moment of space, and it's in your control to contribute narratively because it's, hey, who would like to do this, right? Similarly, a player can say, hey, I want to talk about something like what Savage Worlds was saying. I want to talk about how I overcame something when we were traveling, or something, a skill that I've been working on, or something like that. And you can give folks examples, but they are leading that and deciding when to do it. You can tie that in specifically to travel. Again, if it's nice when you make things dependable, reliable, so that players can expect it. So you could say, hey, when I do travel, we will have breaks, and when we rest, I may call for a narrative scene. And if you would like to, you may tell me these kinds of things, right? And that's a nice way to do it. Come up with some written system that you can give to your players that says, hey, when we rest or in between travel points, we can have these moments, and here's what you can do with them. And I'll reward you for it, right? I'll give you whatever advantage, inspiration, a Benny, whatever it may be, because you have done this, a hero point, whatever it could be based on your game. And that's a nice way to do this, right? And a natural pause in the action, natural place where you can empower players to take off. You do want to keep an eye on whether the same players are always interacting. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Some players may just feel like, this is not the kind of thing I want to do. In which case, you don't want to force their hand, right? You want them to have fun. But if they're kind of being left out but could be involved, then you could have something like an NPC could prompt them to possibly take the discussion. But again, let them decide whether they want to do it or not. Another opportunity for narrative control that can be in the hands of your players, we talked about backstory, but anything related to backstory or to their interests, right? So for example, let's say that somebody has befriended an NPC, right? There was a goblin they found in the caves, and the ranger took them under their wing. Well, as time passes, you can say, tell me what the goblin, tell me about the goblin's tribe. Tell me about what lands the goblin knows about in this area, so that they can provide you some information during play. And the player will probably be thinking, oh, that's really neat, right? Like, because I befriended this goblin, they actually know about this area of the land that we don't, and they can start giving me tips. So I get to tell the DM which areas the goblin lived in. And that really good for both of us, right? The DM now has some ideas that might be there that are being granted by a player that the player will probably want to see used, right? There's a network of caves, or there are a whole bunch of streams that intersect, and there are lots of waterfalls. Cool. Now the DM has something neat to use, right? And it makes more sense for the player to contribute to that because they are linked to this NPC closely. If you have befriended the Tavern Keep, that's where, tell me more about what you've learned about what the Tavern Keep knows, who they know in town, what they did before, right? This can reflect the interactions the characters realistically would have had when we're away from the adventure, right? If we could see the parts that we don't normally play out. And so it makes a lot of sense. You're telling me things your character would know about this character. So it'll make sense to provide that narrative control. Similarly, favorite locations, right? If the wizard is always going to the library, hey, since you spend so much time in the library, why don't you tell me about some of the interesting people who you've seen over the past, couple of months or whatever? Give me a short list, and I might use them in future sessions. That could be neat, especially if that is a rewarding interaction, right? The wizard player gives you a couple of people and then use them in the future to help them or give them clues or get them out of a jam that they have in town. That becomes a neat idea, right? If something like, imagine that the ranger helps a bear escape a trap. Later, they might run into the bear, and you could say, what do you think the bear, your ranger knows this bear pretty well. What do you think the bear is looking for, right? Is it companionship? Is it food? Is it whatever? And so you can let them have a little bit of that narrative reign, and they will feel more easily, like more equipped to answer that. It'll be more comfortable because they have this link to it. So look for those ways to do that. Now, once you have done these things, right? Maybe you're using the torch for a little more narrative control around what's in a room. You are playing off of their backstories, off of their NPC links. They've helped design a little bit of the world before the campaign began. The more that you're doing all of these pieces, it becomes easier for those characters to decide if they want to have more narrative control, and they might even tell you. And listen, it's fine to have these discussions, right? You can say, hey, when you want more narrative control, let me know. And the more that you become a good group of players that can talk about these things, then that becomes a possibility, right? And certain players might say, yeah, in fact, I'd love to give you a list of the people that my bard has been talking to. Cool. Now you can play off of that, right? So I hope this is helpful, right? This idea that you can kind of ease into giving your players greater narrative control by finding some ways that are more comfortable for them to do so, right? Your players can feel empowered, can feel safe to contribute. It doesn't break that wall, doesn't break immersion, doesn't seem like something that should be the DM's job. And over time, they may grow to want to do a greater amount of narrative contribution, but you've found ways to do it effectively. So I hope this has been helpful. Let me know how down below. Make some comments. Tell me, what do you think? How do you approach giving players greater narrative control, encouraging that kind of play so that it's fun for everybody? Or any other questions you have about it. And I appreciate your help. If you've enjoyed this and the other work I do, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I really greatly appreciate it. And give the thumbs up. Easy way to do it without even giving me any money at all. If you can't, that's totally absolutely understood, is just share these videos. Like them, that's great, but actually get them to where people can see them helps me greatly. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.